Imagine strapping yourself into a rocket, feeling the ground tremble beneath you, and then lift off. In just a few minutes, you're soaring above Earth, watching the planet shrink beneath you. The sky fades from blue to black, and suddenly, you're weightless. For decades, this kind of experience was reserved for astronauts, highly trained, government-funded pioneers pushing the boundaries of human exploration. But not anymore. Space tourism is here. It's no longer just a dream from sci-fi movies or the fantasies of billionaires. Regular people, well, regular if you have a few $100,000 to spare, are already heading to space, experiencing the overview effect, and returning home with stories that sound almost too incredible to be real. But what actually goes on behind the scenes? How does a civilian prepare for space travel? What does it take to launch a tourist into orbit and bring them back safely? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will space travel ever become affordable for the rest of us? To understand where we're heading, we first need to look at how we got here. Space tourism has been a concept for decades, but only recently has it started to become a real industry. Companies like Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX are leading the charge, each with their own unique approach to getting paying customers into space. But making space accessible, even to a select few, requires an enormous amount of planning, innovation, and of course, money. So, buckle up. In this video, we're going behind the scenes of the space tourism industry, exploring the technology, the costs, the risks, and the future of this groundbreaking industry. Because while space tourism might seem like a luxury for the ultra-wealthy today, it could be the first step toward a future where space travel is as common as hopping on a plane. The origin of space tourism. Space tourism might feel like a futuristic concept, but the idea has been floating around for decades. The first serious discussions about commercial space travel began in the 1960s, right in the middle of the space race. NASA and the Soviet space program were laser-focused on beating each other to the moon. But some visionaries were already thinking ahead. What if, one day, everyday people could buy a ticket to space just like they would for an airplane? Of course, the technology at the time wasn't anywhere near ready, and the cost was astronomical, literally. Governments were spending billions to send just a handful of highly trained astronauts beyond Earth's atmosphere. The idea of a space vacation seemed as unrealistic as teleportation or flying cars. But as space agencies continued their work, a few ambitious companies started asking a bold question. What if private companies, not just governments, could send people to space? The first person to prove that space tourism was possible wasn't a scientist or an engineer. It was a businessman named Dennis Tito. In 2001, Tito became the world's first space tourist, paying a reported $20 million to hitch a ride on a Russian Soyuz spacecraft and spend 8 days aboard the International Space Station. At the time, NASA wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of a paying customer floating around in space. They were worried about safety, training, and whether a civilian could handle the intense conditions of spaceflight. But Tito completed his mission without issue, proving that non-astronauts could, in fact, survive and even thrive in space. His trip opened the floodgates, at least for the ultra-rich. Over the next decade, a handful of other wealthy individuals followed in his footsteps, paying tens of millions of dollars for a brief taste of space. But these trips were rare, and they relied on Russian space programs, not private companies. It wasn't until the 2010s that true commercial spaceflight started to take shape, thanks to a new wave of ambitious entrepreneurs. Billionaires like Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk saw an opportunity, not just to make space travel possible, but to make it a business. Their companies, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX, each took a different approach to space tourism. Some focused on short suborbital flights that offered a few minutes of weightlessness, while others aimed for full orbital missions that could last days. The competition kicked off a new space race, but this time, instead of Cold War politics, the prize was a booming industry that could one day change the way humans travel forever. But making space tourism a reality wasn't just about having the right technology. It required a massive shift in how spaceflight was approached. Engineers had to rethink rocket design, safety protocols, and how to train passengers who weren't lifelong astronauts. And of course, there was the question of cost. Could space tourism ever be something more than just a billionaire's hobby? That's what the next section is all about. The technology behind space tourism. Sending people to space isn't as simple as strapping them into a rocket and pressing a button. Every launch requires precise engineering, meticulous planning, and cutting-edge technology to ensure safety and success. And when you're dealing with paying customers, many of whom have zero experience in extreme environments, there's even more at stake. The three biggest players in the space tourism industry, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX, each take a different approach to getting people off the ground. Virgin Galactic, space planes and suborbital thrills. Virgin Galactic's approach is the closest thing to a sci-fi movie. Instead of launching straight up like a traditional rocket, their spacecraft, VSS Unity, is carried to about 50,000 feet by a larger aircraft called VMS Eve. Once at altitude, Unity detaches, fires its rocket engine, and climbs to the edge of space, about 85 kilometers, 53 miles above Earth. At this height, passengers experience a few minutes of weightlessness and can see the curvature of the planet before gliding back down for a runway landing. The advantage? A smoother, less intense ride compared to traditional rockets. But there's a catch. It's a suborbital flight, meaning passengers don't actually enter orbit. They get the space experience, but only for a brief window before gravity pulls them back down. Blue Origin, the classic rocket ride. Blue Origin's New Shepard is much closer to what people picture when they think of a space launch. The fully autonomous rocket launches vertically, carrying a capsule filled with 6 passengers. Within 3 minutes, the rocket reaches the Kármán line, the internationally recognized boundary of space at 100 kilometers, 62 miles, above Earth. Once the capsule reaches peak altitude, it detaches from the booster and offers passengers about 4 minutes of weightlessness before beginning its descent. Unlike Virgin Galactic's spaceplane, New Shepard's capsule falls back to Earth and lands softly with the help of parachutes. The entire trip lasts about 11 minutes from launch to touchdown. The biggest advantage of Blue Origin's method: it's fully reusable. Both the booster and the capsule are designed for multiple flights, making it a more cost-effective and sustainable approach to space tourism. SpaceX, the full orbital experience. Then there's SpaceX. While Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin focus on short, suborbital trips, SpaceX offers the real deal: full orbital missions that last days instead of minutes. The company's Crew Dragon spacecraft, launched atop a Falcon 9 rocket, is capable of carrying private citizens into orbit around the Earth, or even to the International Space Station. One of the most high-profile space tourism missions was Inspiration 4, a 2021 flight that sent 4 civilians into orbit for 3 days. Unlike other space tourism experiences, this wasn't just a quick taste of microgravity. It was a true space mission, with passengers living and working in space, just like professional astronauts. SpaceX has also been tapped for even more ambitious missions. In 2023, they announced plans for a commercial lunar flyby using their Starship rocket, which could take paying customers around the moon and back. This marks a major leap toward making deep space tourism a reality. Safety and innovation. Regardless of the approach, one thing all these companies have in common is an obsessive focus on safety. Unlike traditional astronauts, space tourists don't spend years training for missions. They might undergo a few days of preparation, but in reality, they need to be able to handle spaceflight with minimal training. That means spacecraft must be designed to be as safe, comfortable, and user-friendly as possible. Advancements in reusable rocket technology have also played a massive role in making space tourism feasible. Just a decade ago, launching a rocket meant losing it forever. Every flight was essentially throwing away hundreds of millions of dollars. But even with all this technology, there's still one major hurdle keeping space tourism out of reach for most people: the price. And that's what we're going to talk about next. The cost of a ticket to space. If you want to visit space, you'd better have deep pockets. Right now, Space tourism is one of the most expensive experiences on the planet, ironically, because it takes you off the planet. A ticket to the edge of space or into orbit costs anywhere from hundreds of thousands to tens of millions of dollars, depending on the type of trip. Virgin Galactic, the cheapest option, relatively speaking. Virgin Galactic offers the most affordable space tourism experience, if you consider $450,000 affordable. That's the current price for a seat on VSS Unity, and despite the hefty cost, thousands of people have already reserved tickets. When Richard Branson himself took a test flight in 2021, it gave the public a glimpse of what paying customers could expect. A brief but exhilarating suborbital journey with about 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness before returning to Earth. Blue Origin, a price. That's mostly a secret. Blue Origin is a little more secretive about its ticket prices. The company doesn't publicly list the cost of a seat on New Shepard, but early auction winners paid upwards of $28 million for the privilege of flying with Jeff Bezos in 2021. Since then, the price has reportedly settled somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 per seat. SpaceX, millions for the full experience. If you want to go beyond suborbital flights and actually orbit Earth, you'll need a much bigger budget. SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft has carried private passengers on several missions, including Inspiration 4 and Axiom Space's commercial flights to the International Space Station. The cost? Anywhere between $50 million and $55 million per seat. For that price, passengers get more than just a few minutes of weightlessness. They spend multiple days in orbit, experiencing life in microgravity and getting a spectacular view of Earth. In 2023, billionaire Jared Isaacman announced the Polaris Dawn mission, which aims to take a private crew even further into space, higher than any human has traveled since the Apollo missions. Training for space. What it takes to become a space tourist. Space tourism isn't as simple as booking a flight, showing up at the airport, and strapping in. Even though space tourists don't need years of intense training like professional astronauts, they still have to go through a preparation process to ensure they can handle the extreme conditions of spaceflight. Pre-flight training, the crash course in surviving space. Unlike NASA astronauts who spend years preparing for missions, space tourists typically undergo training that lasts anywhere from a few days to a few months. The length and intensity of the training depend on the mission. For suborbital flights, training covers the basics. G-force preparation. Space tourists experience intense G-forces during launch and re-entry, sometimes exceeding 3 times Earth's gravity. To prepare, they train in high G centrifuges, which spin them at high speeds to simulate these forces. Microgravity practice. Floating in zero gravity may seem effortless, but it takes some getting used to. Many space tourists train on parabolic flights, nicknamed vomit comets, which create brief periods of weightlessness by flying in steep arcs. Emergency procedures. Even though the spacecraft are designed for safety, passengers still learn how to respond to unexpected situations, such as cabin depressurization or emergency landings. What happens after landing? Once space tourists return to Earth, their journey isn't over just yet. The transition back to normal gravity can be surprisingly difficult. Some passengers experience dizziness, muscle weakness, and spatial disorientation, side effects of being in weightlessness, even for a short time. Space tourism is no longer a distant dream. It's happening now. What started as an exclusive club for billionaires is slowly evolving into a new industry, with companies pushing the boundaries of what's possible. With Virgin Galactic offering suborbital joyrides, Blue Origin sending civilians past the Kármán line, and SpaceX making multi-day orbital missions a reality, space travel is becoming more accessible, at least for those who can afford it. But where do we go from here? Will space tourism ever become something the average person can afford? Some experts predict that, within a few decades, ticket prices will drop dramatically as technology improves. Others believe that large-scale space hotels, moon tourism, and even Mars vacations could become viable industries in the future. The next big leap could be spaceplanes that make long-distance travel on Earth possible in a matter of minutes. What do you think about the future of space tourism? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes content.